Well, welcome back to Civically Minded, where we give you practical theology for everyday life. I'm your host, Corey Wing. Do you want to start the new year off right? Well, I have two ways for you to make sure that 2025 gets off on the right foot. First, be sure to tune in next Monday, January 20th at noon for live coverage of the inauguration of our 47th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. I'm going to be live streaming here on YouTube, and I'll be joined by some friends and guests to help commemorate the occasion, and I hope to see you then. Secondly, we all know that America's cultural landscape seems to be ever shifting, and that, of course, can be a pretty unsettling thing. And what we need now more than ever are the transcendent truths of God's word and some dangerous friends that have our backs. Come join an incredible lineup of speakers, including Pastor Michael Foster, Rosaria Butterfield, Jamie Bambrick, the Blaze TV's own Steve Dace, and more for Clear Truth Media's 2025 conference, Dangerous Friends. The conference is March 13th and 14th at Redemption Church in Monclova, Ohio, just outside Toledo. I'll be there as well with a podcasting booth, along with my friend Greg Moore from the Dead Men Walking podcast and my good friend Parker Brown from the Watch Well podcast. So come spend a few days in Ohio with your dangerous friends and come by my booth and say hello to get your free civically minded gift. To purchase tickets or for more information, go to dangerousfriends25.com. Be sure to enter promo code civically25 for $25 off your tickets. Now, my guest today is a best-selling author who has a BS in communication from Arizona State University and a Master of Arts in Systematic Theology from Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. He's worked in public relations, sales, and marketing for over 3 decades. He's the author of 4 books, including The Persuasive Christian Parent and Uninvented: Why the Bible Could Not Be Made Up and the Evidence That Proves It. His latest book is entitled Going Back to Find the Way Forward: Trump, A Great Awakening, and the Refounding of America. And I'm going to be honest, it's one of the best arguments for an optimistic outlook on America that I've read in a long time. He currently writes on apologetics and a variety of other topics at MikeDvirgilio.com, and he hosts the Based Boomer podcast on Eschatology Matters YouTube channel. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome here to the right wing from Civically Minded, Mike DiVirgilio.
Well, thank you, sir. That was very kind of you.
Well,
I think
Mike,
these are going to, I'm not going to fit into these for too long here.
well, you know, it's we try to give credit where credit's due, but you know, Mike and I had the privilege of meeting back in October and early November at the Fight Laugh Feast conference down in Fort Worth, Texas. It was my first time to get to meet Mike. We had talked online a few times prior to that because he and I are both contributors, of course, to the Eschatology Matters YouTube channel, and it's been a really honestly, if you watch a lot of my channel, I'd made a video about what some of the highs and lows of last year were for me. And one of the highs of all of 2024 for me was being asked to come on to their channel as a contributor. It was such a highlight of my year. And I've got to meet great guys like Mike through that. And so, you know, it's been a wonderful thing to get to see that and get to know Mike a little bit. And Mike, I want to tell you just kind of right here from the start, one, I absolutely enjoyed the book, but one of the coolest things that I love to see, and I love this just as a person, but I get to see it a lot as a pastor as well, is when you get to see how someone's gifts and their talents kind of come to the forefront, and you know, you get to see them in a new light. And so seeing someone in their own element exhibiting their personal strengths has always been one of my favorite things to observe. And I got to say, as I was reading this book, I watched that very kind man that I met back in October turn into this kind of Herculean giant of philosophical argumentation. And I mean that sincerely.
I paid him to say this, trust
me. it was, I mean, as I went through the book, the way that you systematize and kind of clearly think through what I think so many of us have been experiencing and feeling for probably almost a decade now, since 2016, when Trump kind of entered the foray. You know, it just, with every successive chapter, I kind of went, yeah. I mean, and the only thing I could kind of relate it to is in Bible college, I'd grown up Baptist, but even by that young age, 18, 19 years old, I'd started to kind of have some real theological and doctrinal problems with certain Baptistic theologies. And I didn't know what to do with them.
Mm.
And then a guy on the hall at the college I was attending down in Columbia, South Carolina, I went to Columbia Bible College, which is now called Columbia International University. A guy on my hall brought me a CD of this guy I'd never heard of called R.C. Sproul.
Mm.
And I popped that CD in, and by the end of the sermon, I was crying, because the experience was this guy is teaching and preaching on things that I've seen in scripture, but no one else that I knew was talking about.
Yeah.
And it was so refreshing to understand that I wasn't losing my mind, you know, that
Yeah, I didn't cry when I was exposed to this stuff, but it was just as profound. I mean, it was
Y
wow.
yeah, it's a very touching and moving thing when
Yeah,
you start to realize this isn't just me. This is actually a thing. And I felt that way kind of reading your book, and I'm certain for so many people that have read it, or maybe I actually found out it was on Audible and that you did the reading on Audible, which I think is really cool too.
nightmare. But yeah,
And so, whoever's listened to it or read it or what have you, whoever has consumed this book has probably walked away with a very similar feeling of, I'm not crazy. That this red pill journey that many have been on is something,
well,
and while it may look a little different for each person, of course, that the broad strokes are going to feel very similar. So before we dive into digesting and talking about this great book right here, that we're going to discuss, you bring up some other really good books along the way. And I just wanted to I wanted to nerd out with you for a minute. So you talk
let's go
about
nerdy.
this great book, Francis Schaeffer's a Christian Manifesto, which to my audience, if you have never read this small book, do yourself a favor and read what is really one of the most prophetic pieces of literature probably written in the
Absolutely.
1980s. You talk about I don't know that you talk about the Vindicii, but the Vindicii contra Tyrannos, which is one of the great works of antiquity. That's kind of the defense of liberty against tyrants. It's
I have to
authored.
read it.
Oh my goodness! If you've not read the Vindicii, and I think Canon Press sells a reprint of it. So the
Okay,
Vindicii
absolutely.
contra Tyrannos is fantastic. You do talk about Lex Rex,
Mhm.
so there's my copy of Lex Rex, which I've enjoyed thoroughly. You also talk. You say you have a one volume copy. I have a 2 volume copy of what is political sermons of the American founding era.
Oh,
So here's
mine's
my.
better. Mine's better. Sorry.
Yeah. It's probably is, but
Look
these are
at
my
that
this is
suckers.
my 2 volume copy of that wonderful work, and I agree with you wholeheartedly that preachers of our era would do well to be reminded of how politically themed and charged our early founding
Right.
fathers and the pastors of the pulpits back then are. And
And
I
they had
got.
no problem taking their Christianity to
That's
the
right.
pulpit.
That's right. And
It's
understanding
like,
that it did play out. Here's another one, if you've not read, my friend, that I think you'd enjoy. And it's almost a large pamphlet. It's a very quick read. It's very kind of short book, but it's called The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrate. And it's written by a pastor named Matthew Truella. Again, probably one of the best books I've read in a while. Um, I don't
okay.
have a physical copy of Slaying Leviathan by Dr. Glenn Sunshine,
Yeah, I
but
got that
because I listened to it audibly. But
too.
Slang Leviathan by Dr. Sunshine is probably on my top 10 list of political theory books I've ever read. Of
Wow.
course, I've read Mere Christendom and Stephen Wolfe's book, The Case for Christian Nationalism, and then these I've used even in sermon prep. So this is
Hmm.
American political writing in the founding era. So it's again a 2 volume set,
Mhm.
um, and it goes from 1760 to 1805. It's probably the most seminal work of its kind. And again, for someone like you, if that's something you've never been exposed to, boy, would you would love that too.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So that I just wanted to nerd out with you here at the beginning as two guys that really do kind of love this.
Yeah, reading
So
and learning and learning and
well, and about this
learning.
topic, right? About something that where Christians for at least 2 millennia have understood that there is something innately political about the phrase Jesu he Kyrios, that Jesus is Lord.
Right.
That phrase is maybe the most politically charged thing that you could ever say. And it seems that modern Christians are the only ones that don't understand that. Our
Well, it's,
enemies
it's the Lord of
do
their
get it.
personal life and not Lord of all of reality, right?
That's right. And our enemies have always understood it to be political. That's
Correct.
why it's always upset them.
Mm-hmm.
So I find it very telling that we seem to be the only ones that don't pick up on the very political nature of what Christianity brings to the table.
Well, that's
Well, my
changing.
my friend, I would love for you to now that my nerd has been fulfilled
Got it
and
up.
I've got to geek out with you for a minute. That's right. That's right. I had to kind of get that out of my system. I would
Mm-hmm.
love if you take our audience through your motivation for kind of writing this book and what even while I was reading it, I was very curious if there was anything that changed for you while you were in the actual process of writing, because obviously writing a book is not like a 1 week or a 1 month thing. I mean, usually it's a very lengthy process. So I would love to hear, is there anything that even while you were in the process of writing this book kind of were big shifts for you, either politically or theologically or both?
All of the above. I mean, it's it's interesting because I really didn't have a political philosophy. So as I started a Christian, I'm sorry, political philosophy. And when I was in my 20s and I decided I was going to go to seminary, I thought about going to get a PhD afterwards and possibly getting that in political philosophy itself and developing this whole thought out Christian view of governance and politics and so on. That didn't happen. But so just kind of went through my life, you know, voting and being a conservative. For I was a faithful member of Con Inc. And you've heard that phrase, but I'm sure, right?
I have. Yes, sir.
Conservative Incorporated, which is Con Inc., which is a con, and it took Trump to do um, to kind of open my eyes, and of course, millions and millions of people's eyes to that. But that, obviously, he was the motivator. I say in the beginning of the first sentence of the book that when Trump came down the escalator in June 2015, there was a rip in the space-time continuum. And I have no idea what it means, but something incredible happened. Something remarkable happened that day. And so, like for most people, my journey was slow in developing because I was so ingrained to despise Trump. I mean, literally, just viscerally. And I know how people feel, right? Where TDS comes from, Trump derangement syndrome. And so I slowly saw the uniparty and the Democrats and the Republicans coalesce basically to try to stop everything he did, and they did it with lies. And that eventually, over time, lies sort of grate on you, and it was just ridiculous. And so my mind opened to Trump. Eventually, I find it funny because we were in Illinois in June of 16. I begrudgingly voted for him in the primary over Ted Cruz, and my mother-in-law had to talk me into that. It's, it was hilarious, and yet slowly but surely I became a fan, you know, and to start to see things that I never saw before and question things that I never questioned before. And for like a very lot of people, COVID was the thing, right? This this insane worldwide movement of experts and elites to try to force this whole thing on us. And they knew it was all a lie. I couldn't wear a mask because it so oppressed me of how demonic it was. And, so thank God after the election of 2020 was stolen, are you going to be on YouTube? I should maybe say compromised. Um, I was devastated because I thought they got away with it. And remember, I'm a boomer, a base boomer now. From 1980, when I voted for Reagan, I'd been a conservative. That's when I found out I was a conservative, and I was had a low grade pessimism for my whole life because we're the underdogs. We always lose. Government gets bigger. Liberals always seem to win. The culture gets more and more anti-Christian, and it's just like, ugh. And here they finally did it. all these lies for all these years and they win. And I was just depressed. So thank God in his providence, I found Steve Bannon's War Room, which was on YouTube at the time. And as I always say, he got me out of the fetal position and talked me off the ledge. And the great thing about Bannon is he has no time for thumbsuckers. You know, summer soldiers, sunshine patriots, get out of here. You're not part of our team if you're that way. So I slowly but surely started to become positive and optimistic. And the reason is fundamentally Christian. He's a Roman Catholic, and he would always preach our agency, which defined means we can change things.
Yeah.
And of course, right? I know that as a Christian, we're the Imago Dei, we're made in God's image, and of course we can shape and mold reality. But I had become so pessimistic for a variety of theological reasons and other things that I kind of lost that. And then he says his mantra is all it takes is action, action, action. And man, it was like, wow. And he has grass. He's basically the grassroots guy. He has all these people, normal average people from all over the country, every walk of life, doing things, doing the action part to change things. And they're all woke up, right? They've all waken up. And then J6 happens, and you're even more depressed because it's like, what? But Bannon was just relentlessly positive. And so through that year of 21, I found myself becoming more and more positive. And I had been studying and reading for another book I was going to write. And then I told my wife early in 22, it's like, I think I'm going to write a book about this and about this great awakening that's happening. And that's the book. And I had no clue what it was going to be. I mean, somehow I came up with that first sentence, and it just started there. And seeing Trump, to me, it's just so ultimately ironic how God always uses the most unusual people and the most, people you wouldn't predict to be world changers, community changers, whatever, right? And Trump's that guy. And and that's, as I was writing it, my writing style is like I have an idea, and then, okay, first chapter, and I just start writing. So I knew I had to do about my red pill experience, and which is the first chapter, and some other people's red pill experiences to say, okay, something real is happening here. I think it was Dylan, something's happening. And Mr. Jones didn't get it, but everyone seems to now. And it's a whole different one than the 60s. And then truth is a dividing line in Western culture. And it's interesting because most of the liberal people who've been red pilled believe in truth. They're not Marxist, modernist nihilists. Because all those people believe is the narrative, and that's the media and the Democrats. I often say their hypocrisy is so impressive because it's so blatant. They have no shame whatsoever. And so then, and then I just realized, this is going to be historical because I have to develop this as a Christian, which is kind of bums me out. It took so long in my life, but I have to really understand why I believe all this. So I kept writing and going back in history. Marx is obviously, so I dive into historical Orthodox Marxism with Karl Marx and Engels and all that. And then I get into cultural Marxism because to me, woke is cultural Marxism.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how that traditional communism, Marxism, just failed and morphed into this thing we call cultural Marxism. And then through the education system, because I do a chapter on that as well, that we have woke, which people often, I think, came out of nowhere. So all of a sudden, everything, all DEI, and, but it wasn't. It actually had developed since Marx, but since the 30s, really, or Gramsci in the 20s, and the cultural Marxism of the what's it called, the Institute. It's escaping my brain right now, but that was all happening, and then we're experiencing it, and it seemed to happen overnight, but it had been developing for such a long time.
Well, you get like the Frankfurt School, right?
Frankfurt School. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, and what you and I know, both being formally educated at seminary, and going to actual theological training, what most folks in our audience may not know is there's a reason why the big mainline denominations have also went this way.
Oh yeah.
That the seminaries have been completely infected with this same type of mind virus. And it is birthed out of that Frankfurt School, or in theological terms, it would be the German higher criticism, where it's just, we'll question all the dialectics, all the axiomatic truth. We're going to question everything. Is the Bible, really true, or is it just kind of moral, again, axiomatic truth, where it's kind of moral truth? There's some wonderful nuggets and takeaways there, but was there really an Adam and Eve? Is the creation, again, really literal 6-day 24-hour, I mean, as the
Yeah.
Bible seems to say, or is
Right.
it kind of, that's all just, it's up for grabs, and,
Metaphor.
and so you get out of that Frankfurt School, and sure, it affected us philosophically, it affected us politically, but my goodness, the effects theologically were maybe as cataclysmic, if not more so, as any of them, because
Right. Because they drive all the others.
that's right. If culture's
Fundamental
downstream,
presuppositions, right?
that's right, right. If culture is downstream from politics, and politics is downstream from religion,
Right.
so it's one of those things that there's a reason, and there's been other authors that have certainly touched on some of the more theological side of it. I think John Harris did a couple of books on the woke industry coming to the church, and Vodi Balkum's good, wonderful book called Fault Lines, where he talks about some of that. But what I loved
And
about
you being a pastor, a PCA pastor, you've experienced kind of this battle in real time, haven't you?
oh yeah, oh yeah,
Right?
yeah. It's and I just had Josh Howard on this week, and I
Okay.
had another PCA pastor on Tuesday. So I've had a lot of, and you're PCA, so I've had a lot of PCA guys on this week. Yay, PCA! Um, and the
We're not
PCA,
going anywhere.
that's right. And we're going to fight for something that's worth fighting for, and the PCA is absolutely, as the largest Reformed denomination in America, it is worth fighting for.
Absolutely.
Um, but we watched in real time as the Revoice side B, this gay Christianity was rearing its demonic head within our own denomination. And honestly, there for a couple of years, we were on the ropes,
I
and
know.
it looked like, well, there goes another one, and
I talk about third wayism in the book, and that Tim Keller was kind of a. I learned a lot from him. I mean, he was tremendously helpful in my apologetics journey, and just the gospel centered stuff really meant something to me at the time. I didn't know there was really any downsides, but trying to everything he did, and they did, and that's really a whole movement of kind of the evangelical elites, right? Big Eva of trying to find that third way, so you're kind of appealing to both, and it's just so it just leads to that.
well, you use a word in your book that is a wonderful, wonderful word that I would love to reintroduce into more common vernacular. But you use the word hubris
Mm-hmm.
in your book a couple of times, and you even define what hubris is, and you even go into some of the mythological backings of hubris. And again,
Yeah.
every chapter, I just, honestly, and I am not trying to blow smoke. Every chapter, I was like, man, this is good or better than the last. I mean, I really thoroughly enjoyed the way that you
Well,
systematically just started punching down targets. But when I think about that word hubris and that third wayism that you just talked about, that's the word that comes to mind.
mm-hmm.
The arrogance, and I hate to say this because, again, like you, Tim Keller, I think did a lot of net positives. I think
I totally agree.
his ministry to the city, and reason for God, and I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff that Tim Keller did that was great, and I
Absolutely.
certainly think he's in heaven right now. I'm not saying he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't think any of that,
No.
but I do think the hubris that it took to say, after 2,000 years of church history, that he had come up with this novel idea of, not this, not that, but I've come up with this third way. And I think no one before you, Tim, I you're a brilliant guy. No one's arguing that, Dr. Keller, but
And some of that argument, and some cases, resonated with me.
Yeah.
That's why I couldn't see the downside until much later, you know. But some of it really did, and it worked. It's like, oh, okay, that I see how that fits, and but then you can see I can now, it's clear how that can go so wrong so quickly,
Well, it can
especially
be
stuff.
it can become, and it did become so weaponized. And I just recorded a short last night. I've not even uploaded it yet. And it was on John chapter 8 verses 3 to 11, which is where the scribes and Pharisees bring a woman, they dump her at the feet of Christ,
Right?
and they've caught her, quote, in the midst of adultery, in the very act. And of
Where's the
course,
guy?
that's the first question you should ask, is
Right,
if
right.
you're in the midst of adultery, where's the guy? It does take two to tango. So where's the guy? But as you and I both, know, that story is not about that. It's a gotcha moment. They think they have cornered Christ in this impossible conundrum that he couldn't possibly work his way out of.
Right.
And either he's going to be lenient on her, which would therefore show that he doesn't care about the law of Moses or the moral law of God, and ha ha, or he's going to just pick up a stone and do what the moral, what the law of Moses says, which is stone her right there in the public square, and then that's going to cost him followers. And they thought, we've got him, but they didn't understand what you and I know, which is he's the God man. So he masterfully bends down, writes in the dirt. We don't know what he wrote, of course. And when he stands back up, they've all left. And he says to this poor, shamed woman,
The older ones first.
the older, that's right, the wiser ones
Exactly.
first. That's right.
The ones who can't lie to themselves so easily.
And so this poor, shamed woman, the Lord of all glory, the God man, who had the moral authority and the holiness to cast stones at her had he wanted to,
Indeed.
he says, "Where have your accusers gone?" And she, of course, says, "Lord, they've all left." And then again, God wrapped in flesh says, "Neither do I condemn you." And if it stopped there, that'd be a tragedy.
Yes, indeed.
But it doesn't. He
Right.
says, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and
Go
sin no more."
anymore.
And I
Yeah.
think the modern American church is caught betwixt those two sentences, and so I
Yes.
see what Tim Keller was trying to do, and say we needed to thread that needle between the condemnation of the fundamentalists
Right.
and the grace and mercy at all costs of the lefties, and
That's very very insightful. That's good.
and so I can appreciate and understand where I think he was trying to go with it.
Right.
But because we're so broken, because we're so human, we
Right.
just have a hard time threading that needle. So we end up
Patterning.
patterning, thank you, patterning our churches with rainbow flags and complete acceptance, and saying, "Hey, come on, we want you," but we're never going to throw the "go and sin no more" in.
Even if it's not that bad. We went to a church in the Chicago area, CRC, and but it wasn't denominational. Surface nominally reformed,
Yeah.
and how this worked itself out there was never addressing these issues. The
Mm.
only
Mhm.
time the pastor talked about homosexuality, and we were there, I think, 8 years, was when same-sex so-called marriage was passed, or around that time, and he preached through some of Romans 1. That was the only time, and he expressed how uncomfortable it was, and blah blah blah. Couldn't just say, that's evil. Homosexuality is a sin, should not be allowed. Blah blah blah. Whatever, right? But he couldn't do it. So they're not putting up rainbow flags, but you know what I'm saying? Compromise is there by omission.
That's right. That's right. Or we go the other route, where it's the scarlet letter, it's the worst sin possible, it's the unpardonable sin, and we couldn't possibly allow you to come here while Christ is doing something very real in your heart. I said earlier that I'm going to be attending that conference where one of the speakers will be Rosaria Butterfield, and she's
Right,
kind of a
right.
personal friend, and
Mm,
her testimony is that it
exactly.
is a pastor
The
and his wife,
pastor,
that's
right?
right, who loved her through not
Unconditionally.
just being a homosexual, but being a radical, I mean, an absolute,
Lefty, total lefty.
oh yeah. I mean,
Feminist, hardcore.
Absolutely. She was
Great story.
pushing the agenda, you know, and so they loved her through that
Right.
and did that very John 8 thing of, "I'm not condemning you, but go and sin no more." You know what I mean? And there's such a beauty in that simple gospel message. And what does that have to do with the book you wrote? It's got everything to do with the book you wrote. As I was sitting there reading your book, that was in every chapter, on every page, that only Christianity has the answer to the CRT, DEI. You know,
All of
you
it.
either come at the world through the lens of Christendom, or you're bringing something else to the table, whether
Sure.
that's Marxism or communism or secularism, you know,
Right. There's
and
no neutrality.
that's and touch on that a little bit. You talk about that in your book a lot. Obviously, Doug Wilson is very famous for talking about that as well. But talk to our audience a little bit about that concept of that there is no neutrality. It's either Christ or chaos.
Yeah, and that's a phrase I learned from Doug Wilson as well. You know, it's interesting. Secularism is so dominant that it's like, you know, the proverbial fish in the water. And we as Christians are totally influenced by it as well. The problem with secularism is that there is no irreligious space in reality. There's no irreligious person. There's no irreligious. And when I say irreligious, one of my favorite saying, one of my pet peeves is when Christians say, well, they refer to certain people as believers and other people as unbelievers or non-believers. There is no such thing as an unbeliever. That's actually was going to be the title of my next book before I started writing this one. There just isn't, because we all live by faith. And
Yeah.
why do we all live by faith? We're finite. We have limited knowledge no matter what. And no matter how much we know nothing, pretty much, right? Thimbleful of a thimbleful in an ocean. Of course, all knowledge is God, so it's infinite. So we know nothing. And so the idea that we can have this kind of space in a society where we're neutral and all the claims of all the religions are somehow equally assessed, and whatever the best claim is wins, and then we'll go with that and so on. It just doesn't exist. And it's interesting because you use the word hubris, right? Which is this overweening kind of pride and arrogance. And in the ancient world, that was a setup. They would use hubris as a means of ancient place, that it would show that somebody who is this arrogant and has this overweening pride would eventually get confronted by Nemesis, which was the god of justice. And bad stuff was going to happen. And it wasn't just luck or being unlucky, or just that you know, you jump off the building and you hit gravity takes you, right? It's that you will be punished for what you're doing. And the universe that God created, his created reality, that is the fundamental nature of it. So, we're talking about writing the book, and what I learned, I begin to very slowly see that the reason we can be optimistic is because lies cannot endure, right? And and all of if all of reality is religious, then there's something about truth that is religious, right? That's faith filled. And for you and I and other Christians, the reason we believe in truth is because he who is the truth,
Mm.
right? Which is Jesus himself. So truth has, I do a section there on the metaphysical and spiritual implications of truth. Because truth isn't just the nature of things, like whatever, this wood is solid. No, it is a person, and it is about how reality functions. Reality. So homosexuality is a good example. If you continue to persist, or any sex outside of marriage, very chances are likely you will get a disease and die. Right? So God says, don't do that. Just have one partner, a woman or a man, in marriage for all of life. You'll never have any kind of sexually transmitted disease, right?
Yeah.
But if you think you can get away with it, you have all this pride that you can do whatever you want, and Nemesis is going to get you. You will be judged, and that judge will come in the form of disease and death. Or if that doesn't get you, it will be a miserable life, because only true human flourishing comes through God and obedience to his law. So it's interesting. So the more that the left lied, which to me was the judgment of God against them, they could not help themselves. You know, they
Yeah.
just kept pushing it. And as I'm writing the book, of course, August was it 15th or was it August 8th? It's my dad's birthday, August 8th. They go into Mar-a-Lago, and you're going, what? They couldn't help themselves. And of course, there's three other prosecutions and so on and so forth, and this just continued to open more and more and more people's lives. And the left
With
thinks,
with a shoot on sight order if need be. And I think,
oh yeah,
what? Of a former president? I mean, because you're right.
so
The nature of sin, and there's an old Baptist idiom, and it's probably not just the Baptist. I'm sure others said it, but I grew up Baptist, and I heard this in Baptist church all the time from Baptist pastors that sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. You
that's
know,
really
and
good.
and that is the nature of sin. You cannot evade it because the law of God works the way it works, because we live in a universe that he created, that he
Right,
sustains. He is not just the author and finisher of our faith, he is the author and finisher of all things.
everything. And that's the point of, see, my optimism wasn't in our efforts. A lot of people accuse someone like me and say, oh, you just think because of you and what you do, you're going to cause whatever. Not really. The It's the universe that God has made and the way he made it to work. And you can spit into the wind as long as you want, but it's going to come back in your face. It just
Yeah.
is. There's
Yeah.
just no way around that. And the left and anybody that lives on lies, an empire built on lies, cannot endure. That's just a fact, right? And I talk about Reagan and the Soviet Union, and he talked about in the early 80s, one of his first addresses in England was, this Soviet Union will go into the dustbin of history. It's over. It's not going to last. And we also, yeah, maybe, but not in our lifetime, surely. And then the Berlin Wall, it's coming down, and come on, Ronnie, you know, he understood what we didn't, which was that you cannot sustain anything on lies. And the left, all of their success is built on lies, so it's obviously not success, is it?
Yeah.
It's so
Yeah.
fragile. So that's why I constantly used the metaphor of the Berlin Wall for the left and liberalism and secularism and progressivism, because it's cracking bad. And I'm of the conviction now, because of everything that's happened, including the election, including what's going to happen Monday with Trump becoming president again, is that we are on the other side of this whole Enlightenment experience and secularism. And there's nothing on the other side of secularism that's secular. And I'm convinced that it's played itself out. It's on its deathbed. It's gasping, wheezing, and probably even being buried as you and I are talking right now. That there's nothing on the other side. It's not. One of the great Saturday Night Live, when it was actually great, was More Cowbell. You remember that?
Oh yeah. Oh
More
yeah.
cowbell. And that's more secularism. Yeah, that's going to do it. Just give us more secularism. And people are, just so many people are realizing that.
Double down, triple down, quadruple down on secularism.
And a lot of conservatives and Christians do not get that. They still are convinced about this post-war consensus kind of liberal establishment agreement that, the lie of secularism, that it's religion and Christianity primarily that created all the wars of religion. Right? It was Christianity itself that was going to undermine civility and lead to, people who are narrow-minded and bigoted and homophobic and whatever, right? Racist, you name it. And no, it wasn't that at all. It's human nature, which of course our founders understood, perfectly, and so on. So
Well, and I've tried to you bring up a wonderful topic there of what we are bludgeoned with all the time as Christians, certainly as in modern CRT, DEI, 2025 America, and you kind of bring this out in your book. The great evil is what's on screen right now. So look at us. We're it. We are white, heterosexual, Christian, males. I mean,
Married men, it's even
married, yep,
worse.
married with kids,
Oh,
just we represent everything evil that has caused the downward slide of America and of Western civilization and even colonialism. So we it wasn't enough for us to
yeah.
to ruin ourselves. We had to go
I go
ruin
ruin
the
the
whole
rest of the world.
world. That's right. That's right. So and what amazes
Oh,
me is that I've said this to many people, because like you, I've studied our country, I've studied our founding, and I've said, instead of looking at the flaws of our founding fathers, and of course they had them, they were human beings, and let's even say slavery, and I agree, chattel slavery, as known here in America, would have been punishable by death in the Old Testament, because
it was called man stealing.
man stealing,
Exactly.
that's right, man stealing is punishable by death in the Old Testament. It
Right.
is always condemned. Don't give me this garbage that, well, the Bible, no, 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 no. When the Bible speaks of slavery, it's a very different institution
Right.
than what we had here in America. Chattel slavery is an abomination to God.
And there was no such thing as race-based slavery
Oh yeah,
in the
that would
ancient world.
exactly.
That
They
would have
wouldn't
been
have even understood that.
no
That's such a modern and again Marxist concept of
Darwinian, right?
Darwin. Yep, yeah, and these categories that Darwin and then Marx really invented and then expounded upon. They
Right.
wouldn't have even understood what we were talking about.
Yeah.
But when you look at that, I've said to many a person, go back and read our founding documents. That we hold these things self-evident, that all men are created equal. Do you understand the courage it took to write a document that you knew wasn't true at the time,
Mm.
but that you were building a country that you believed one day it would be?
An
I mean,
aspiration.
that is, stop bludgeoning these men and understand that they wrote a document that they understood. These weren't dumb men. They understood this isn't even true right now, but we are hoping to build a country in which it one day will be. You know, the immensity of that understanding,
Right.
of that forward thinking, is what all of these 19 and 20 year olds, that are picketing on college campuses, you don't understand the shoulders of the giants on which you're standing. You, that these men gave you the liberty and the freedom to talk about things that you don't understand. And
Right.
so I want to transition just a little bit. One of my favorite argumentations that you brought forth in the book is, and then I want to talk about Babel a little bit later, and the concept that you repeatedly go back to about Babel. I want to get to that too, but before we get there, I want to talk about you. You say something in the book where you kind of juxtaposition liberty, and you say in the book choice. But again, because of your theological training and because a lot of my channel is both politics and theology, I want to kind of reframe that, from the language you use in the book to something a little more theologically underpinned, to what in theological terms we would call as the difference between liberty and license,
License. Right.
or what in scripture would be the term licentiousness. Could you unpack kind of that division between liberty and license?
Well, as modern Americans, the most sanctified concept in our existence is choice, and no limits on one's choices. We think, although everyone practically knows there are limits, that is basically what liberty quote means. And it's interesting because conservatives will often use the phrase ordered liberty, which is a redundancy. I mean, the founding fathers had no need to say ordered liberty because liberty was by definition ordered, and you couldn't have true liberty unless you had a ordered people, a self-governing, moral, and religious, which means Christian people, which they all, Christianity was 98% Protestant, America was at the time. And so when they talked about religion, they meant Christianity. Adam said, right, there's this republic and this constitution was meant for a religious people and no other kind of people. So that is, and so liberty has a profoundly moral foundation. And if you don't understand that, then you think it's just choice. That's why I've never been comfortable with libertarians, because they really do believe that the choice, because their argument is that if you can't choose something and you're forced to choose it, then that's not a moral choice you're making. But it's really who's forcing you to do anything? That's not even part of the, there's no forcing, right? If we make laws, laws are primarily negative, right? Don't do this thing, right? So, so it's just silly. So this idea of choice, licentiousness, and that's a good connection too with license um, and choice, because to think you have unbridled choice and there's no limitations on those is just not true. It's not at all Christian, and it's in reality will not allow that. It's just as we talked about with sex, right? You can't. You have to limit your choices. And what do you do with your children? You have three pretty young ones, right? So
do.
that's all you're doing is teaching them to limit their choices, right? To make the
And
right choices.
and when that Romans 1, which you mentioned earlier, when that Romans 1 world comes to fruition, and you see, like you bring up a great point there. My children, like I said earlier, 9, 5, and 2, they don't decide when they go to bed. They don't decide what they eat for dinner. They don't decide what they're wearing to school. They're at ages where their mother and I are making every basic choice for them.
It's benign authoritarianism.
Yeah, and but based on love, based on
That's right. It's
superior,
benign, right?
yeah, based on love and superior knowledge. So
Exactly.
so we make pretty much every decision for them, and we are living in such a Romans 1 existence now in America that into that reality, which pretty much every decent parent is operating under that reality within their home,
Mm-hmm.
we have tried to inject, but they can tell you what sex they are and what gender they are. And you kind of think, wait a second, my 5-year old and I'll do something in real time. This happened this morning in my house. This is real world. My kids came in and woke me up this morning at whatever time it was, because they're young. They wake up before on a day that we don't have to wake up. My wife and I try to get us a little bit of extra sleep. So they came in and woke me up, and my son is beaming, ear to ear smile, and you can see the pride just almost like a neon glow, just coming off of him. And I said, son, what's going on? I made breakfast for you and mama, and I made coffee. And
Oh,
now he's 5. you know
that's sweet.
I said, okay. So we rouse ourselves, we get up, and we make it downstairs. Of course, we've got to stop off and get the 2-year-old up and get her ready. So we make it downstairs. There is an giant oversized bowl sitting on our kitchen table. He's used the entire rest of the gallon of milk that was in the fridge. It's all gone. It's in this bowl.
Uh,
He has also used the entire thing of Ready Whip. The whole can of Ready Whip is also in the bowl. He's unwrapped probably 30 or 40 different candies, including Starbursts and chocolates, and I mean, you name it. Yeah, M&Ms, they're also in the bowl. And I don't know what was in my wife's coffee mug that was coffee-ish, but it wasn't coffee because he doesn't know how to operate the coffee machine. He's used our magic bullet blender to puree some of the chocolates that he wanted. I mean, it's a whole thing. It's a mess. Of course, it's a giant mess, and it tasted like death. I mean, it was atrocious. And he's made a giant mess. He's went through tons of groceries doing it. We weren't mad because he was trying to do something. He was trying to bless us and make this wonderful
exactly.
breakfast for us. But I mean, this is the world of a 5-year-old. I use that example in real world time because this is what my 5-year-old thought breakfast looked like, and this is how he shows his overwhelming love for his parents. And of course, they took a few bites of it, and we ended up trashing the rest of it. It was what it was. But we live in a such a backward society, such a
Right.
sin-soaked society, that you want me to have that same 5-year-old tell me the most fundamental definitions about who he is, where he's headed as a human being. I mean, this is Romans 1 in real time. That
But that's
that
the beauty of it, though, right?
that's
Because
you're right, because it's falling underneath its own weight.
exactly, and the normies, right? The people who are just regular, maybe not religious, not political. They they just it had to go that far. See, to me, that's why it's God's judgment, because too many Christians see God's judgment as an end in and of itself, like God's going to crush them. Look at them, ha ha ha. No, God judges so that he can display his mercy in judgment, right? And give his grace and wake people up to the truth, to Jesus, right? And so they had this. I mean, it's so insane what the left has done with all of this. It has to be the devil, right? It has to be demonic. That's what woke up Naomi Wolf. She said it was such an evil in COVID and the whole scam and everything that this couldn't be made up by human beings. There has to be a devil. So she believed in God again.
That Ephesians 6 moment, you talk about that in your book as well, that that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual darkness in high places, and all of these authorities and demonic figures, and I've had folks in my church say, I don't understand that and I always kind of point them back to Daniel. Go back and reread Daniel. When Gabriel shows up in Daniel, and I think it's in Daniel chapter 9, and he shows up with an answer to Daniel's prayer, and he says, you were heard from the moment that you knelt down and started praying, but I was withheld. I was held up. I was coming. God dispatched me. I was coming with the answer, but I was held up, and I had to call on Michael the archangel to help me, to come
Yeah,
fight for me, because of the what is in the text called the Prince of Persia.
it's crazy, Wow.
And again, we don't know, that the text doesn't give us every detail, but obviously something in space time was fighting and upholding the angel Gabriel from getting to Daniel, and he had to call on a stronger angelic being to come and fight on his behalf. And it is referred to as the Prince of Persia. And I mean, you think, I don't know how to explain that fully, but I can see it in real time happening in the Bible. And so, because I believe that all of the Bible is God breathed, as we're told in 2 Timothy 3,
Right.
and that it's profitable, I take it at its word that something there was happening in the
Absolutely.
spiritual realm, in the realm that we can't see with our physical eyes. And if you think, to all of my viewers, if you think that that's not happening and hasn't been happening here in America, you're kidding yourself. There are malevolent, wicked, demonic forces that are fighting for the souls of every American and every person on the planet, for that matter.
Exactly.
And they hate you. They absolutely despise you. They want to go back and reread Screw Tape Letters, or read it if you've never read it. I mean, it's such a
Absolutely.
beautiful telling from a mind as sharp as Lewis's of, this must be what it looks like in the demonic realm, where they're just plotting and scheming all the time on ways to hurt us, to get us, to kill us. So when you kind of play that out in the book, I thought that was masterful. I did say earlier, and I'd like you to touch on it kind of as we wrap up. I know we've been going about an hour now, and so I want to start kind of, you know, landing it. But
Absolutely.
if you could take my viewers through this whole kind of reoccurring concept that you really touch on it a lot in the book, of this idea of Babel, and how Babel ties into all of what you were talking about in that book.
Yeah, it's kind of critical because it's the nature of reality. Um, it exists in the hearts of human beings. Just does. And in fact, when you talk about Ephesians 6:12, and then the spiritual battle, it's not against flesh and blood, that should only be quoted in the context of Ephesians 1, because when Paul says that God raised Christ from the dead and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly realms, far above all rule and authority, power and dominion, and every name that can be named, that is the context. We don't fight like it's like our battle, it's Christ's battle, right? And so, and then connected with Babel, and I think I counted, it's like 39 times I use that in the book, because what COVID showed us is that globalism, this idea of a global power to control, is everywhere. That truly is the battle of our day. That's what makes. I learned the phrase populist nationalism from Steve Bannon, and it's so fascinating. It didn't start with Trump, but it started with Brexit, and it started with, again, the left opening up borders in Europe and allowing all of these immigrants to come in illegally to all of the European countries, and people just got sick of it. And finally, the the Brits said that's enough, and they were all treated like deplorables. They were all just like, and the elite said, God, this will never happen, because borders. I talk about in the chapter on Marx and the Communist Manifesto. One of the things he says that must be abolished is nations, right? So national borders are antithetical to everything the communist wants, and the globalist it's the same thing, because and if we exert our sovereignty as a nation, then well, what's going to happen to the elites and the experts that are telling us for our own good what we need to do? You
Mm.
know? And that was the beauty of COVID and its tragedy, is that it's just not going to work. It's just not going to work. And the reason goes back to Genesis 11, goes back to the building of Babel. And what we see is when man starts to build something up to the heavens, God says, if they succeed at this, then nothing they do will be impossible for them. So what does the Lord do? He scatters them, right? And then he ends up confusing their languages, because he will not allow Babel to succeed. That's a fundamental fact of existence. So any of the cynics out there, the conspiracy theorists who think this globalist thing has any chance of actually succeeding, are just not paying attention, right? God will, in fact, the consolidation of power will always fail, but it will always cause massive misery wherever it goes, because hubris, right, and nemesis, it will always do that. And that's the beauty of seeing. So I'm a longtime conservative, right? From 1980, I said. So we as conservatives were free enterprisers, right? We believed in free trade. The global market is awesome. When Bush in the early 90s was like this new world order, it was like, yeah, that's great. We'll get something 20 cents cheaper at Walmart. Isn't that wonderful? And corporations were a good thing, right? There was no downside to corporations, and the left would talk about evil corporations. And lo and behold, the consolidation of power in corporations is just maybe worse than the consolidation of power in government, right? And we couldn't see that because of that ideology, And it took Trump to open our eyes to that. And that's really the story of Babel, is this consolidation of power of man and his hubris, thinking he can accomplish whatever he wants, whatever he sets his mind to. And it's up to heaven, right? It's basically dethroning God. It's Genesis 3. You will be like God, knowing or determining good and evil. And that's so. And as I was writing that, I'm seeing the lies just multiply. They can't help themselves. And seeing this whole globalist thing, and seeing that, it was such providential mercy for God to allow Biden to win the 2020 election, because then they thought Trump's vanquished, right? This whole populist nationalist thing's over. Then January 6th was like, now they really discredited him. It's really all over now. So um, they're not coming back, and Trump's certainly not coming back. And then it became the woke left, Obama, Biden, administration on steroids. All of
Well, and the mask came off, right? Because they thought, well, we don't have to hide anymore because we've
yes,
just got a public mandate. So again,
they think
supposedly,
right. They
um,
think
to that this is where America wants to go, and so they just kind of they
ramped it
just
up
stopped hiding. I mean,
exactly,
and what I'm with you. What a grace, what a gift from God that was, and
turning
I
that
think
evil into
that's
such
right.
good.
And it made me think. You said that the lies on top of lies on top of lies. Of course, who is called not just a liar but the father of lies, and that when and you say this in your book that when he speaks, he's using his native tongue. I mean, his native language is lying. Well, of course, that's the devil. So when we see these folks that are acting and operating just with blatant dishonesty and as if it is their native language, well, then they're telling you on
Yeah,
what side of the aisle they're falling. These are children of the devil, but I love that you end the book with, eschatology. And as we both write for Eschatology Matters and video for them, I didn't understand the significance of a robust eschatology and how much eschatology plays into teleology, and it plays into even ontology, that because there's a plan and because we actually are something, we are in this case, we are created in the very image of God. We have the imago Dei. Because of that all being true, eschatology is significant. And that you ended the book in that fashion, and that, yes, all of this bad stuff that I've said in the whole book is true. All of that's happening, and we're seeing it in real time.
Right.
But because Psalm 2 and Psalm 82 and Psalm 110 and First Corinthians 15, and because all of that's true as well, this is heading somewhere. And because all of Christ's enemies will be placed under his feet like a footstool,
Until.
and then he will return. You know, hallelujah, praise the Lord. We win. And I've tried to remind my church even recently, you keep waiting, and I can't remember exactly how you say it in the book, but the at the 11th hour, kind of the field goal from the 60-yard line, where and Jesus wins at the
Comes
last, and
back and
everything.
saves the day.
That's right. He everything's dark, and wow, he comes back with this Hail Mary. And I've tried to remind our people at our church, if you're waiting on that, you're 2,000 years late. That did happen. It's called the cross. The crucifixion, and then the glorious resurrection of Christ that we celebrate at Easter. That's the event you somehow missed. He did do that when human history was at its absolute darkest point. That's basically how the Bible frames the first coming of Christ.
Exactly.
What we celebrate at Christmas and then celebrate again at Easter, the first advent of Christ is the moment they keep waiting on. How'd you miss it? In the darkest moment of human history, Christ wins. And then he goes back to the Father and sits down at his right hand, to where now the book of Hebrews tells us he ever makes intercession. He is operating as our great mediator of this covenant
Not just for our
forever,
personal salvation, but for everything.
for the whole covenant. That's right, for the whole of creation. That I mean, again, Paul says it in Romans a different way, that all of creation is
Oh,
groaning, it's yearning for the revealing of the sons of God. And we're seeing it. We're seeing it in real time. And if that doesn't give you great, all of my viewers, if that doesn't give you a great hope for the future, not just for America, but for all of creation, then let me invite you to rewatch this episode. Go over to Eschatology Matters and watch a lot of their stuff. Stay here on my channel. I talk about this type of stuff a lot. I actually sent my good friend Mike here a video I made over a year ago about the connection between Brexit and the Tower of Babel, and I'll try to link it to this video here, both in the notes, and I'll try to make it clickable here at the end of the video for you. But you can go back and see that. I mean, so what I love about the great Lord that we serve is, while Mike was thinking these same thoughts and writing his book, Christ was also talking to me in my ear and saying, "Hey, look at the connections between Babel and what's going on now," and that Christ is speaking to his people across time, across lands, and we are just like when you see the inflection point that was the Protestant Reformation, and that you see in a very short period of time all of those reformers who had been thinking the same stuff, and none of them knew each other. They didn't know that God was telling them the same story. And then in a very brief point in human history, in the 1500s and in the early 1600s, you'd get men that just go, "Wait a second, you were thinking that too?" And I agree with my brother Mike. I believe we're at another such inflection point where God is whispering in the ears of his people, and he's saying, "Pay attention. I'm doing something. Wake up. I'm doing something."
what's so
And
exciting is that
it,
when you talk about kind of this positive, optimistic, I, I had I said I need to have a theological reason for it. And I thought it might be in creation. And then it was in August of 22 that I was exposed to postmillennialism. And that's my last chapter. And so, and it was like, oh my gosh, I thought this was a discredited, I didn't want, I just thought it was done, and there's no reason to even think about it. And then slowly but surely, and then a few weeks later, Doug Wilson says on some podcast I listened to, he said, now you have the theological justification for your optimism. And I was like, that's it. That's what I was searching for. That's why I wrote this book. But it's all in what God is doing in Christ because of the first advent that he's taking, establishing his kingdom on earth, extending his reign and building his church. It's just, and that just roots it, that eschatology, that teleological, right? There's a purpose in all of what God is doing, and it's just glorious.
Amen. You're gonna turn me into like some Presbycostal.
Hallelujah.
I'm gonna
The
shout and sing and
Pentecostal.
start getting up and dancing. Eh, I want to end on this because I want our viewers to understand that this is still happening in real time. I watched Biden's farewell speech. I don't know if you got a chance to see it, but I sat through all 17 or so minutes of it, and you know
Oh,
it was
you're a
painful.
stronger man than I am.
And and in his farewell speech, there were so many Marxist talking points. It was just crazy. I mean, he talked about this, technocratic oligarchy as if the left hasn't had a major hand in that. That's what I thought was so funny. Because again, back to your idea of lies, they just lie like it's nothing. The gaslighting that's went on for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years has been so blatant, it's crazy. And then he even talked about like the robber barons, of the 1800s and I was just honestly, I sat there. My wife was watching it with me, and I said, he may as well just say bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. I mean, he's saying the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat. That's what he's saying. He's just
Billionaire
using
oligarchy.
that's right. He's just using modern American language to talk about the same worn out, tired Marxist, communist, leftist. I mean, it was
Which isn't he a perfect metaphor for that though? The guy, he didn't. The people that wrote that are probably in their 20s and 30s, and they're all Ivy League educated. And and here's the man delivering the message who's just worn out, can't remember to whatever he did yesterday or today, and that's the guy delivering Marxism
yeah.
as the final message of that's the Obama Biden year. I mean, it's just
I
really perfect.
fundamentally, we're 2 days away from fundamentally changing America. You bring that out in your book, and I watched that speech and thought, who said we need to fundamentally change America? Wait a second. So Mike, I just want to say thank you, not just for being my guest today and for being my friend and for being a co-contributor on Eschatology Matters. I want to thank you for writing this unbelievable book, and just I want to encourage my viewers to do what Mike says in the book, what he learned from Steve Bannon's War Room, to be a change agent wherever you are. Don't just sit on your hands and do nothing. I want viewers of this channel and anyone that would read Mike's book or go over to Eschatology Matters and see what he's doing with the base boomer to understand that because you're created by God himself, that you hold the image of God within you, you too can go out today and be a change agent for the Lord. Certainly through your witness, you can tell others about Jesus Christ, but more than that, and not that there's anything more important than that, of course, but you can also get involved in local politics. You can get involved in your church. You can get involved in other civic, community organizations within your communities. Be sure to be the change and the agency that you want to see, because like Steve Bannon says, there's no room for wimps, there's no room for crybabies. We have I think it's Larry Elder that says we have a country to save. We better get out there and do it.
Absolutely.
So be sure to tune back in on Monday as well, as I live stream through the inauguration ceremony of our 47th president, Donald J. Trump. I would love for you to join me there. And until next time, for the right wing from Civically Minded, I'm Corey Wing. Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Corey.
Let me get us out of recording. All righty. Mike, thank
That
you,
was
buddy. That was
fun.
fantastic.